Hi guys and welcome back to Biologue. Hope you're having a great day and a great week. Today's video is going to be about a transport in plants revision sort of video. So we're going to do this past paper series in the next few weeks for each and every topic for IGCSE biology. So if you do want some past paper questions to be answered, do subscribe and turn post notifications on so you'll be updated on every video I post. Now we're going to do a past paper series for every topic, and today's topic is going to be transport in plants. So we'll be discussing some questions. So if you like this video, do like, share and subscribe to Biologue. With that being said, let's just get right on to this video. So the first question is that the diagram shows how the appearance of a potted plant changes over a period of 4 days, and the question is asking us to find out which environmental conditions are most likely to cause this change. Now you may pause the video to formulate your answer and then click the video again to find out the solution. Alright, so now let us look at the solution. So firstly, what is this change? This change basically refers to the idea of wilting. Alright, it refers to the idea of wilting, and wilting basically refers to the loss of water from the plant. So the conditions would be low humidity and high light intensity. High light intensity because photosynthesis would increase. So if light increases, photosynthesis increases, water uptake increases, so water loss increases. So it will be C. Moving on to the next question. In which order does water pass through the cells of a plant as the water travels from the roots to the leaf? Now, when it travels from the root to the leaf, we know that first thing that will come is the root hair. So we have two options. Then it will come as the root cortex. So obviously now you know that the answer will be D. Root hair to root cortex to xylem to mesophyll cells. Alright, moving on to the next question. The next question is that the diagram shows cells from a storage organ of a flowering plant after they have been stained with iodine solution. The fact that it is iodine solution is very important. This is stained black. What does it show that the X contains? Now remember, the key word here is contains, not what structure X is, what it contains, which means that the answer will be starch. Why? Because when there is a presence of starch, when tested with iodine solution, the color changes from brown to blackish purple. So that is the color change that we're able to see over here. Alright, now the next question. Translocation occurs in phloem tubes. Aphids feed on the contents of phloem tubes. What type of food would be lacking in their diet? The term lacking is important here. Pay attention to that. So remember, in phloem, the transportation of sucrose and amino acids is very prominent, and naturally the aphids will also get water from the xylem. So what is the substance that they will be lacking? They will obviously be lacking the fat in their diet. Alright, now this is a very good question. Make sure you put a star on this. Diagram shows changes or the stages in the plant passage of water. These circles are the starting points for the arrows to show the direction in which the water moves. Which circle must have an arrow pointing downwards only? Downwards only. Alright. So now let us look at each case. Remember that it will not be C. Now most likely you may think that it is C, but it is not C. Why? This is the xylem, this is the phloem. Remember, C is placed between, meaning that it's neither, like the position of C is neither between in the xylem nor in the phloem. So even though the xylem it transports the water or conducts the water in one direction, remember that xylem conducts the water only in the upward direction, and phloem conducts in both the downward and upward. But the question only asks us to specify about the downward direction. So downward only is what it is asking. So the answer over here would actually be B. Why is that the case? It will be B because as you can see, these are the guard cells. it is through the guard cells and the stoma over here, the opening, through the stomata or the stoma, which is the opening over here, that the water vapor also moves out. Now, as I mentioned previously, remember the water vapor can be transpired in two methods, either by the upper layer of the epidermis or from the stomata via the guard cells. Alright, so this is one of the ways, and the water moves only in the downward direction in this case. That is why the answer will be B. Alright, moving on to the next question. Question number 30. The diagram shows the stem of a plant. The strip of the outer tissue, including the phloem, has been removed. The phloem has been removed. How is transport in the plant affected? Alright. Amino acids and sucrose cannot pass to the roots. Dissolved salts cannot pass to the leaf. Water cannot pass to the leaf. Water cannot pass through the roots. Now remember, the xylem is the one that transports the water. So naturally, you can cut out these two options. Even the xylem transports the dissolved salts. The xylem transports the dissolved salts and the water. So this option is also cut out. Naturally, we know that the phloem transports the amino acids and sucrose from the source to the sink. Alright, from the source. Sorry about that. It always transports it from the source to the sink. And we transport sucrose and amino acids via the phloem. This is known as translocation. It's a process known as translocation. So naturally, your answer will be A. Moving on to the next question. The graph shows how the rate of the transpiration is affected by the X. Alright. The factor X is what we have to identify here. So what is X? Now remember, according to the previous information that I gave you, the factors that affect the rate of transpiration will be humidity, temperature, wind speed, etc. Now remember that only humidity is the factor that will cause an inverse relationship with the rate of transpiration. As you can see, there is an inverse relationship over here, so we can naturally assume that it is humidity, because as the humidity increases, the rate of transpiration decreases. Alright, so if humidity increases, the rate of transpiration will decrease. Alright, let's go to the next question. Now, the table shows the rate of water flow through a tree over a 12-hour period. What conclusion can be drawn from the table? So obviously now this point and this point cannot be drawn because it's a very vague conclusion that they have stated, and we cannot really draw this conclusion from the data that has been given in the table. Now if we look at the A and B option, between 7 and 17 hours the rate of flow continuously increases. Look at the table. Till about here we can see an increase, but from 300 to 280 we are able to see a decrease, and that is between 15 and 17 hours. So that comes between the range of 7 to 17 hours. So that is actually wrong. So what our answer will be is B. Alright, so for this question the answer will be B. Moving on to the next question. What are the likely readings on the spring balance after 3 days? Alright, so this is the question. Here is the data that has been given to us. The diagram shows two shoots at the start of an experiment on transpiration. As you can see, here there are leaves present, but here there's a lack of leaves because over here there's no leaves. One justification that we can make will be that here transpiration will occur. So transpires, the leaf transpires over here, and there is no transpiration over here. So when the leaf transpires, there will be mass loss. Alright, because water is being lost. Similarly here, because no transpiration, there is no mass loss. So now let us look at the options that we have. Shoot X, this is shoot X, this is shoot Y. Shoot X will have mass loss because there is transpiration. Shoot Y will not have mass loss because there is no transpiration. There is no leaf in shoot Y. So shoot X will have mass loss. Shoot Y will have no mass loss. So the option will be C. There is mass loss here and there is no mass loss here. Alright, moving to the next question. The diagram shows the part of a trunk of a small tree with a branch removed, ring of bark removed. Removing the ring of bark takes away the phloem, but the xylem remains intact. Which effect? So what effect will removing the bark on the two branches have? What is the effect of that? Alright, so let us look at the options. Now if you see the options, to me C looks the most appropriate. Why? Because the growth of the plant will be reduced. Obviously, why? Phloem is taken out, so there is no food source for the leaf itself. There is no food source for the plant, but the leaf will remain normal because it is at least getting water for the process of photosynthesis, so it is able to sustain its own food by making its own food via photosynthesis. The upper branch over here, will be normal. The growth will be normal. That is because obviously now the xylem remains intact and the phloem remains, it is removed. So now the phloem, remember, now the bark is removed here actually. So the growth of the upper branch will remain normal and the growth of the lower branch will be affected, because we are actually assuming that the food is being transported from bottom to top. From top to bottom. Sorry about that. We are assuming that the food is being transported from top to bottom. Alright, from the leaf over here. Assuming that the food is being transported from the leaf, this portion will not be affected, but because this region, this bark region is removed over here, this portion, the leaf here, will be most affected, due to which the lower plant, the growth will be reduced because of lack of food, but the leaves will remain normal still because it is able to produce its own food via photosynthesis, and these two will remain normal because we are assuming that the food is moving from a region at the top over here to the region at the bottom over here. So it is moving in the downward direction via the phloem. So the answer will be C. Alright, a celery stalk is placed in a beaker of blue dye. Once the blue dye reaches the leaves, the celery stalk is taken out and cut in half. How is the appearance of the celery stalk like? So remember that the celery stalk, the blue dye, whenever you see a question that talks about a dye, always think about the dye dissolving in water. So the dye actually dissolves in water, and the transportation of water will happen only via the xylem. Now remember, xylem in the cross section of a stem, this is a stem, okay, either in the cross section of a leaf or in the cross section of the stem, the xylem is always placed inside. So you will see the stain in the inside portion of the cross section. Where is the inside portion? Obviously it is B. So the answer for this question will be B. Alright, moving on to the next question. The diagram shows a plant shoot and the same shoot 6 hours later. Which change in the environmental condition could cause this change in the shoot? Alright, as you can see, the effect that we see over here is wilting again. And as explained, it is a loss of water. So now actually what happens is that we should not assume that it's only loss of water. Sometimes wilting also happens because there is less uptake of water. Because there is less uptake of water also, wilting can occur. So the only viable option over here will be a decrease in the available water. Why? Because if there is a decrease in the available water, the plant shoot will not take water. So there is zero uptake of water, and this causes wilting. So the question answer will be A. Moving on to this question, in which order does water pass through the cells? Now we did this question before, as the water travels from root to leaf. Now I want you guys to pause and answer this question. Alright, so as we discussed previously, it is the root hair to root cortex to xylem to mesophyll cells. And we come to the last question. The lower end of a plant stem is placed in colored water with a red dye. Again, the question asks you about a dye. So remember what I just said. After 3 hours, the stem is cut and shown in the diagram. Which labeled region is stained red? Obviously, remember now xylem is always on the inside. So as shown previously, the xylem will be on the inside. So the answer will be A. Okay, now moving on to some paper 4 questions that are longer. So the first question is figure 4.2 shows the rate of water conduction up 3 different trees in a forest over 24 hours. Alright, here is the graph. Rate of water conduction per hour is the y-axis, and here's the x-axis, which is time. So remember, dry mix is the one way by which you can understand which variable goes where on a graph. So dry mix meaning that the dependent variable goes on the y-axis. So here is the dependent variable. Rate of water conduction is dependent on the independent variable dry mix meaning independent variable on the x-axis. So independent variable is on the x-axis, meaning time is the independent variable. Alright, now the question asks you to describe the rate of water conduction in tree A using this 24-hour period. Now firstly, I think what you should do firstly in the case of a graph question would be to first of all identify any patterns. So if you're able to see a peak, for example, that is one very prominent pattern that you're able to see over here, right? You're able to see peaks like so. And similarly, if you're able to see peaks, that's the first prominent thing you should look at. So if I'm able to see peaks, I will write that first. Secondly, you should write if there is a lag. Okay, a lag or a delay sort of. Now what does lag or delay mean? See, lag or delay basically means that there is no result for a certain period of time before which the curve actually starts. So let's say over here there is some sort of lag, alright, or there is no water conduction before a certain area. So over here, are you able to say any pattern like that? Yes, you are. So there is no water conduction before this 4-hour limit over here. Before the 4-hour mark, there is no water conduction, which would mean that there is a lag. There is a lag or a delay. This is known as a lag or a delay. Alright, the third point could be that any gradual increase or steep increase can also be a point. So, for example, let's look over here. There is a slow or a gradual increase from about 4 hours till about 7 hours, somewhat here, right? There's a slow or like a, this is actually about here. This is where you should be marking it, about 7 hours here. So, mark this point. You're able to see a gradual increase over here. Alright, that can be your third point. The fourth point can be that maximum water conduction rate is where. So where is the maximum water conduction rate, right? The maximum conduction rate will be at the peaks. Now as mentioned earlier, you can add this point to the point that says that at these places there is a peak or there is an optimum. You should say that the maximum conduction amount is, let's say, 2.4. It's approximately 2.4 dm cube per hour. And writing the units is very important. Alright, so remember the units is also a very important factor when it comes to describing graphs. And lastly, you should also mention if there's any steep increase. So there's a very different concept. There's a lot of difference between steep increase and gradual increase. Gradual increase means that it is slowly increasing. There's a periodical increase in the y-axis value as the x-axis increases, but a steep increase is seen by the gradient of the graph, the gradient of the curve. So if the gradient of the graph or the gradient of the curve is very steep, like in this case, look here, this is very a steep sort of curve, right? A steep sort of graph. That would mean that there is a steep increase in the water conduction rate per unit time. Alright, there's a steep increase in the water conduction rate, and you should also mention from which this steep increase starts. So this actually starts from about 7 to 7.5 hours. After 7 hours, you can see a steep increase till about this point, after which there's a decrease, and then a peak, and then a gradual decrease, and then an increase, and then a steep decrease or decline until the point where the reading comes to 0. So that is exactly how you should be describing it. I will write down the points for you guys so you guys may take it down. Alright, so the first point what I said was the peaks, right? There are two peaks over here. One is the 10-hour period and one is the 15-hour period. Yeah. So there are two peaks actually from here about, it's about here somewhere. I'll use a different color so that it's more identifiable. Right, so it's about here somewhere, about the 10-hour period here and about the 15-hour period over here. Right, so you should first write that there are two peaks. There are two peaks, one at the 10-hour period or 10-hour point, and the other at the 15-hour point on the x-axis. Alright, so you should probably label it that it's on the x-axis of 15-hour point, which will move up to a certain level of 2.4 dm cube. So as I mentioned, you can actually add this point. This peak level or optimum maximum level is 2.4 dm cube per hour per unit time. Alright, now the second one is any lag. As far as I remember, we mentioned that there was a lag, right? There was a delay. This delay is till 4 per hours or 4 units of time. So how you can describe it would be that there is no water conduction before 4 unit time, before the 4-hour mark. So you can say that there is a lag or a delay in the graph. Alright, so how you word it is like this: there is no water conduction before the 4-hour mark, hence there is a delay or a lag seen in the graph. Alright, so you have 1, 2, you can make this as another point, this as another point. So overall you will have 4 points, which should suffice the amount of marks that will be asked in the question. Otherwise, as I mentioned, you can also specify if there is a steep increase, steep decrease, slow or gradual increase, gradual decrease. Even those can be good points for you to mention, and those will also get you sufficient amount of marks. Alright, now moving on to the next question. Suggest how ecologists use the data in 4.2 to calculate the total volume of the water used by a tree in 24 hours. Alright, so how this is done? Alright, firstly you can say by calculating the total amount of water that is conducted in the 24-hour period. That is probably the simplest way in which you can calculate the total volume of water used by a tree during the 24-hour period, which is to calculate the total volume conducted during the 24-hour period. So you take the volume per unit time, like per hour, and then basically you take it per hour for each hour, add it all together and find the total volume for the 24-hour period. Alright, so how will you say this? You're supposed to say that it can either be just calculated per hour or per unit time, hence with the values added, per unit time added, the total volume can be found. Alright, moving on to the next question. In figure 4.2, tree A is a tall tree, right? Tree A is a tall tree. Tree B is a medium height tree and tree C is a short tree. Suggest reasons. Now that is very important. Suggest. It's asking you to suggest, not really specify, but suggest reasons for the different rates of water conduction in the three trees. Now, this is not very specific, but you will have to state a few reasons. Alright, the first reason could actually be something like different environmental factors. For example, maybe these trees might be in different environmental conditions, like different so first let's write different environmental factors, such as different humidity, different temperatures, for example, or even different light intensity. Why are we saying that, if the environmental conditions differ or they vary, the transpiration rate will vary. So if the environmental conditions vary, transpiration rate will vary. So, and remember that the rate of water uptake only depends on the rate of transpiration. The more the transpiration, the more the plant will take up water from the nearest vein, right? So you should remember that as the transpiration rate increases, the rate of water uptake increases. And so any of these factors except humidity, remember that when humidity increases, transpiration decreases, and so water uptake decreases. But for temperature and light intensity, when these two factors increase, the transpiration rate increases, and so there is more water uptake as a result. The second point could actually be the different height itself of the tree. For example, tree A, is the tallest. So if you think about it, tree A being the tallest would actually mean that tree A is nearer to the sun. So you could tie this back to the idea that the taller trees would be nearer to the sun. So they will have again greater light intensity, so greater amount of transpiration, so greater water uptake. Alright, so you have to link it back to this idea right here. Alright, moving on to the next point. The next point could actually be something like, for example, different thickness of cuticle. Alright, different thickness of cuticle. Now, what is a cuticle? Cuticle is the waterproof layer on the upper epidermis of the leaf. Remember, it is a waterproof layer on the upper epidermis of the leaf that actually prevents excessive transpiration. So, yes, it does allow some water to evaporate via transpiration, but it prevents excessive transpiration to prevent the excessive loss of water from the leaf. So, it prevents desiccation or drying out of the leaf. Now, the thickness of the cuticle. How do you think the thickness of the cuticle would relate to transpiration and thus relate to the uptake of water? As the thickness of the cuticle increases, the rate of transpiration decreases. So, you could write that the cuticle thickness is inversely proportional to the rate of transpiration, and thus the rate of water uptake or water conduction. Alright, so in this case, as the cuticle thickness increases, rate of transpiration decreases, hence rate of water conduction decreases. Now this is 3 marks. Always look at the marks before you start your question. So this is 3 marks, which means that you would only possibly need 3 points. So here are the 3 points. Alright, first point, second point, and third point. Right, now moving on to the next question. This question is about transport in plants. 2 pea plants, D and E, were supplied with substances containing radioactive isotopes, carbon-14 or phosphorus-32. Alright, as shown in the figure. A leaf of plant D was exposed to radioactive carbon dioxide. Plant E was placed into a solution containing radioactive phosphate ions. Now this is the image. take a close look at it. You may analyze the image now, and it is important to analyze the image because we will need it for formulating the answers. Alright, now moving on to the question here. After several hours, the plant was analyzed for the presence of the radioactive isotope. Sucrose containing carbon-14 was found throughout plant D. Compounds containing phosphorus 32 were found throughout plant E. Complete the table 4.1 to show the tissue in which each plant is transported, one possible sink for each substance. Alright, so now the transport tissue. The transport tissue for sucrose is the phloem, obviously, right? The phloem transports the sucrose and the amino acids via a process called translocation only in actually in both the upward and the downward direction from the source where it is produced to the sink where it is stored or used. Now, what is the sink? The sink is where it is stored or used. So you can actually say leaves, actually not leaves, you can say roots because they contain the storage organ. Like in the case of potato, it contains a storage organ called tuber where this sucrose will be stored for future use. Or you can even say the flowers, the buds, the growing buds like the lateral buds, the terminal buds or apical buds, etc. So a good example would be to actually put roots. So let's write the roots. Now pH, I think this basically refers to phosphate. So let's write that down. Phosphate ions. Phosphate ions, remember that ions are dissolved in the water and are taken up by the xylem. So the transport tissue over here would be the xylem. And similarly, the sink could be anything, wherever it is stored or used. For example, the leaves, right? The leaves require water and these ions for their metabolism, for their growth, and they require the water for photosynthesis. So the sink could be leaves in this case. Alright, moving on. State one other substance other than sucrose that is produced in leaves and translocated to other parts of the plant. So as mentioned before, sucrose and amino acids are transported via translocation in the phloem from the source to the sink. So the answer here would be amino acids. Alright, not proteins, it is amino acids. Because if you write proteins, the mark scheme rejects it. So remember to write that it is sucrose and amino acids via translocation. So the answer here will be amino acids. Outline how sucrose is produced from carbon dioxide in pea plants. Alright, so sucrose being produced from carbon dioxide, we know the process. During photosynthesis, the water molecule will split up into its constituent elements like hydrogen and oxygen. The hydrogen will combine with the carbon from the carbon dioxide to form carbohydrates, the glucose. Now, how exactly is this water splitting up into hydrogen and oxygen? It is via the energy from the sunlight. So the plant or the leaves use the energy from the sunlight to split the water into its constituent elements, hydrogen and oxygen, and then the hydrogen combines with the carbon from carbon dioxide to form carbohydrates or the glucose, which is transported in the phloem. Alright, and the glucose has to be converted into sucrose so that it is soluble and can be easily transported. So let us write those points down. Because it is 3 marks, you should be writing in point form to make it more easier for the examiner to understand. First point, during photosynthesis. Alright, so during photosynthesis, the energy from sunlight is used to split the water molecule into hydrogen and oxygen. Then after that, the second point you will write is that hydrogen combines with the carbon from carbon dioxide to form the carbohydrate glucose. Alright, third point, the glucose glucose has to be converted to starch sorry, not to starch, to sucrose. It's actually converted to starch for storage, but for transportation it is converted to sucrose. For transportation via the phloem. In the bracket you can write translocation via the phloem to the sink, where it is used or stored. Moving on to the next question. State 2 uses for the sucrose in a pea plant. Firstly, the sucrose can be converted to starch for storage. Alright. Secondly, some sucrose can be converted into cellulose for the production or synthesis of cell walls. Alright. Now explain ions, basically how ions such as phosphate ions are absorbed by plant roots. Phosphate ions are absorbed by the plant roots via a process called active transport. So you have to mention that. Active transport is the first point you have to mention, that active transport is a process that helps to transport phosphate ions, where these ions are taken up against the concentration gradient. These ions are taken up against the concentration gradient using energy like ATP from respiration. Alright, you have to mention that it is from respiration. Secondly, you have to also say that active transport is done using carrier proteins. So active transport, I'm just going to label it AT. Active transport is done using carrier proteins in cell membranes. Alright. Now, how it is absorbed by the roots, you will have to say that the root hairs absorb water in which these phosphate ions are dissolved. Alright. So actually, if you see the order, this should be your first point, after which you should write this as your second point, and then this one should be your third point. Alright, you guys may take a screenshot of this. Alright, so that is all for the questions in my past paper series for transport in plants. I hope you guys liked it. If you did, do like, share and subscribe to Biologue. With that being said, thank you so much for watching, guys. I really hope you have a great day and a great rest of the week, and I hope you guys are not giving up and you're preparing well for your exams. So I hope they go well, and I will see you guys in my next video.